I want to start with this, which is you have to have the right perspective when it comes to practice management in general, because a lot of people will start with what I would call, they have a process, they have workflows, but their processes are actually like, I heard a really good way of saying it. They're a mature workaround, which which is sort of like I think what a lot of people get stuck in, which is you're not actually doing a process, but rather you're going ahead and just, well, on day one, I sat down on my desk and I decided, here's what I'm going to do. And then I decided, wait, I want to add one more thing in. And then I want to add one more thing. And now you have this like amalgamation, a pile of just sort of like, hodgepodge of processes that aren't in actual workflow, but rather they're just sort of, what you've done because why not, right? But at the end of the day, that doesn't really solve the issue that you're looking to solve. So that was the perspective I came at that I learned through the process of starting to use TaxDome. And full disclosure, like I use TaxDome every day. I'm a paying customer. I tend to be a bit more enthusiastic than the average than the average accountant about this software, but like I'm utilizing this every single day. So the first step, I think, that the perspective that I want people to take is before you start utilizing technology, before you start figuring out what type of workflows can I do and integrations and things like that, is do you even have a process? If you would zoom out 20,000 feet, you're in an airplane, you're looking down at your firm, right? Whatever that consists of. And, maybe somebody like me who I'm, a solo practitioner with a part-time assistant, and you may have staff, of like 20 some people. I mean, for those who answered the survey I sent out, it looks like, almost a quarter of the people here are at mid-sized firms, 6 to 20 people. When you're working with a group of almost 20 people, you're talking about a hugely, vastly different calculation. And you really need to come at it in the perspective that you can't just rely on hopes and wishes. I remember speaking to a guy a few weeks ago, or actually a couple months ago, and wow, it was last year. Actually, I take that back. It was July of last year. I remember, because I was on vacation, and this guy got in touch with me, and we were like WhatsApp messaging back and forth, and I'm telling him all about TaxDome. And I remember asking him like, "Oh, how many clients do you have?" And he's like, "Oh, 300-400 or something like that." And I was like, "How are you doing this?" He says, "Oh, just an Excel spreadsheet." And I'm like, that's awesome, and I'm sure it works great to a point, but I'm sure it also leads to a lot of stress and forgetting things. And the perspective that I want people to be taking is that you need to have a process in order to be able to actually rely on it. Because if you don't have a process, and you don't have a system that encapsulates that process, you can't actually rely on the work. So that's like the overarching principle that I try to like take in any practice management system, right? A system is only as good as its weakest link. TaxDome does solve a lot of those issues. I will be the biggest defender of TaxDome and simultaneously the biggest critic. I probably have more suggestions on the feature board with TaxDome than probably anybody else, because I know it's like I know where TaxDome lacks, but I also know where it excels, and I know as a practitioner what can I utilize, to actually accomplish my goals. So that being said, and by the way, feel free to hop in if anyone has a question. You're welcome to either raise your hand or just pop in. Please interrupt me. So with that overarching principle of practice management needs to work for everyone, and you need a system. Again, some people don't believe that. Some people believe they don't need a system. An Excel spreadsheet's good enough, or whatever tax return is on their plate, that's just what they work on it. And for them, like I say, go off, King, which is young people speak for good for you. But at the end of the day, like that isn't a system. You're not actually working in a system. You're just going off of vibes, which is fun. Certainly if you're doing it on the side or something like that. But if you're trying to build something, it doesn't exactly work. So with that being said, what did I write? Okay. So TaxDome is very unique. And I have tried out a bunch of, I like for fun, and I really need to stop doing this. I do demos of softwares like all the time. In fact, I actually have a demo scheduled later today for myself for a different practice management system. Not because I think I'm going to change, but because I love seeing how everyone's approaching these same issues. At the end of the day, everyone has the same goal of we have to get work done, right? We have to get work done for our clients. We have to get work done inside the firm. We have to track it accordingly. We have to have a good system. And every practice management system is going to approach that a different way. I'm going to show you the TaxDome way. So that's the intro. So something that I feel like is unique to TaxDome, and could be other systems, will have this, is that you can always, for the most part, except for like really, really fresh beta features, you can always get the viewpoint of the client, right? Which is super important. And I'll tell a funny story. Many, many years ago, in my first career, I was working at a firm that worked with dentists, and the dentists needed help with two things. Number one, negotiating their fees with insurance companies, and number two, what they call credentialing, which is becoming eligible to process insurance claims through specific insurance companies. So the firm I was working at, not an accounting firm, they dealt specifically in the insurance world. I left there. I said I'd rather do a tax return any day than deal with insurance companies. But they rolled out this software. Specifically, I want you to like think about it almost like TaxDome, but for collecting information from the dentists about their practice, so that way then they could fill out these applications. And the day they rolled it out, they sent a big invite to all the users or all their clients and said, welcome aboard. And the link that they included in the email was not a link to like sign into their portal, but rather it was like to sign up for the white label software. Like imagine you sent an invite to go sign up for TaxDome, for your own TaxDome workspace, to all your clients, instead of like inviting them to your portal. And I was just sitting there on the sidelines because they didn't ask me to do that project. I had nothing to do with it. But I like sort of have this like user experience, user interface design eye, and I'm like, it's just like the ABCs that you need to be thinking about what your users are doing. So I'll show you that, but that's just sort of like an overarching thing, is that almost anything you do, you can also see it from the user side, and you need to be thinking about it from the user side. That being said, let's get into the fundamentals of TaxDome specifically. Now, every practice management system will do this differently. Every practice management system is going to deal with this differently, but here is how TaxDome does it. So, and again, like these fundamentals I'm showing, if you understand this, you're in really good shape to utilize this software really well. And it's people that don't understand these fundamentals, because the sales reps, they're going to talk about like all these, like, you could do automated this and automated that. And it's like, no, I just need to understand the basics. So every account can have contacts. So that's like the first, I'll say, dimension. I was thinking of making a cool graphic, but you'll just have to imagine it in your head. Every account is something you're working with. So that would be, like, for example, somebody's tax return. So Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so, right? And then that account can have multiple contacts. This, like, dimension is something that, again, when you're moving over from, let's say, like, when I imported my clients, right, I moved from QuickBooks Online. So I did a big export of QuickBooks Online of all my clients. But in QuickBooks Online, usually, like, when I have a married couple, let's say, it'll just be Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so, right? So now I need to add this new dimension of having multiple contacts. Now, this plays really well into being able to do a lot of really cool things. So first of all, when you have multiple contacts on a specific client, you can have a lot of options in how things like signing, right? So you can send a tax return to be signed by both spouses. When you have a business, right, you can have the business owner. You can also have the business owner's bookkeeper, all as separate contacts, and you can set one as a signer, one as not a signer. When you send out proposals, you can require everybody to sign. You can require only one person needs to sign. But understanding just that first step, and I've worked with people, I speak to people when I go to different conferences and seminars about TaxDome specifically, and I've worked with people, also helped people one-on-one, where that first step they have the most trouble with. They end up buying TaxDome, and then they end up sitting on it because they can't get around doing that import. And granted, it's not the most simple thing. I mean, if you're used to like the world of like, importing data using CSV files, like it's not the craziest thing, but like even me, I'm like super techie, AI, tech first, and everything like that. I've done imports where I just had this. I'm working with an HOA, and I imported all their all the units like into this HOA software, and I somehow by mistake made it that the address was the same for all units. So when I imported it, it all said like 123 Main Street for every single unit. Like even I sometimes have issues. So like granted, it is tricky. So you really have to be ready, like, you know, for anybody that's looking to get into TaxDome, if you're not already using it. So step number one is like you need to give yourself that runway in order to fully implement. So I would like not recommend doing this in January like I did. I joined TaxDome December of 2024. I spent like 2 weeks watching every single video in their online education space that they have, where they have, you know, videos on all the different features, which, by the way, TaxDome, I mean, as difficult as it is to grasp, is actually very user-friendly. Most of, like, the features you can find yourself, especially, like, if tech is your thing, like, relatively quickly. But I knew that if I didn't spend the time to, like, really internalize it, I'd miss out on a lot of features. So the step number one is contacts and accounts. And if you understand that difference, now you can go ahead and actually implement properly. So just that's like the ABC starting point. The next point that I want to get into is something that took me months to figure out. And once I understood it, it made me be able to work inside of TaxDome so much better. So it's 4 things, and this is like, I like calling it the 4 dimensions of TaxDome: jobs, pipelines, stages, and tasks. At first, like, all those things sound very similar, and, you know, partially because I think people go into this having preconceived notions, where they think things like from things they've used in the past. So, you know, every project management system that I've used has different ways of, you know, sort of calling these things, you know, or in Excel, you know, we all, you know, a lot of us started off as like solo doing taxes on the side, and we just had an Excel spreadsheet, and we had, you know, simple things like the client's name, the current status, maybe some notes, right, in an Excel spreadsheet. And that's like very one-dimensional, right? So nothing is like, you're literally using one table, right? But when you introduce these like 4 dimensions tasks, jobs, pipelines, and stages, it's very like, you know, people think that it's really confusing and really hard to implement, but actually it's a lot more simple. So here's how I say it all the time. So a job travels through stages on a pipeline, accomplishing tasks in each of those stages. I'll say it one more time. A job travels through stages within a pipeline and accomplishes tasks at each one of those steps. So I'm going to walk you through what we call inside of Taxome a pipeline, which is your process. Now, again, like I mentioned before, it's really important to make sure that, you know, your process is written out literally from A to Z. Like, you sit down at your computer, you get a client somehow, you perform work, you deliver that work, you ask for a review, you follow up with the client for further work in the future. Like, all those steps are part of the process. And very often people will divorce portions of that from the process, thinking, oh, it's just like an extra thing. But no, it's like, it's integral from all the way in the beginning, before you even start, maybe even lead capture, right? Which you can do inside of TaxDome. Although, you know, I'll talk about the pros and cons of whether you should do that. But even like lead capture, which happens all the way at the beginning before you even do work, all the way to following up for a review, those really need to be inside of your system, right? So if Taxome is your system you're implementing, and I'm a big fan of 100% utilization, you never want to, like, you know, underuse a software that you're paying for, certainly. Although, again, there's pros and cons to that as well, and I could like talk about it for hours. But just to start us off, just to show you, I'm actually going to show you the template of this pipeline. One of the nice things also about TaxDome is there's a whole marketplace where you can actually purchase pre-made pipelines along with all the dependencies. So a pipeline will have tasks, chats, organizers, things like that they're all connected, so you can purchase them. And not only that, is there's a ton of them for free. Now, again, I think going into this, you really have to be ready to implement and utilize in a way where you're going to actually manage that, because you can't keep on buying, let's say, an organizer year to year, because like specifically, and this is just like a technological way TaxDome works, there's certain features inside of an organizer, and organizers like, hey, you send it to your client, hey, fill out your name, social security number, different details about your life, things like that. In order to utilize it year to year, you have to actually use the same, what I would call, physical organizer. You can't switch from one to the other, otherwise you can't pre-fill data and things like that. So once you implement, you have to be ready to really utilize that, right? So inside of, let's look at this one pipeline. I actually took this. I'm pretty sure TaxDome has had a webinar and they showed off this pipeline. But again, you can go ahead and utilize it however, and customize it to your specific process. But I'll just go through what's happening here. So again, we said a job travels on stages through a pipeline, accomplishing tasks each stage of the way, right? So stage number 1 is welcome emails and proposal, or EL, engagement letter, which when you create the job, and I'm going to show you live in a second. We'll create a job and I'll show you what it does. It's going to send out a proposal to the client. It's going to send an email to the client. Now, depending on what their tag is, every account can have a different tag, and that can create all these conditional tasks based on what type of client they are. And the great thing about tags is it creates this like multiple dimensions on top of everything else that you can now go ahead and like accomplish all these things. And it's really as far as your imagination goes, and possibly even as far as AI's imagination goes. I'll talk about that maybe towards the end. But specifically for this case, and again, this is assuming that this is this person's process. This is, this firm's process. This is a demo account, by the way. So anything you're seeing is not real client data. I made sure to get a demo account because I didn't want to show you guys all my clients. No offense, but yeah, I just figured that'd probably be prudent of me. So if this client is a new client, then they're going to get this email, which is going to be specifically geared towards new clients. If they're a returning client, then they'll have a tag as a returning client, and you can automate all of that, right, for the most part, and we'll talk about it. Then there's also a client-facing status. So I'm sure you get all the time emails, hey, where's my return? What are you up to, right? Can you search templates in the marketplace? So I believe so. A lot of people also will go ahead and so it looks like you can filter them. Honestly, I haven't really touched the marketplace in a really long time. You can specifically, you can filter them for I mean, the marketplace isn't that big. Also, people, when they talk about pipelines, they'll advertise, and you can get a direct link or whatever it is. But you can also take templates of specific things like specific chats or specific proposals or organizers, just those themselves, which is really helpful, by the way. It's easy to edit. It's much harder to create from scratch. So, okay, let's go back to the pipeline template. So in this specific thing, right, stage 1, now the client-facing status, right, instead of them saying, hey, where's my return up to, there's always a client-facing status that's going to show them exactly what their return is up to. And obviously, again, zooming out, depending on what your management system is, will define how much detail you want to give and how granular it's going to get. But the point is, now they have somewhere to go that's other than emailing you or sending you a chat message. Once they sign that proposal, because certain tasks automatically will happen, but certain tasks need to be completed. And sometimes the client needs to complete it, and sometimes the firm needs to complete it. So in this case, stage 1, the proposal has to get signed by the client. Once the client signs it, you'll see this little toggle over here to move jobs automatically. That will go ahead and trigger to go to the next stage. The next stage is waiting for organizers. So you'll see it'll apply a folder template. So inside of TaxDome, you can hold all your client documents. I'll show you the document portal in a second, but it applies this folder. It creates an organizer, which will then get sent to the client. Then it sends them a message inside the portal saying, hey, here's how to complete the organizer. And you can send a chat message if you have any questions. And also, it updates the client-facing status. In this case, whoever made this template decided first steps was the ideal client-facing status. Once they complete that organizer, it goes into the prep stage. Now, a lot of people utilize Taxome in different ways. Some people use this without any actual tasks. I'm not a fan of that because I think that's like missing like that originally a four-phase dimension. I was talking about before, jobs, tasks, stages, within a pipeline. You really need to have a task at every single step of the way. Otherwise, you aren't really utilizing the automatic features of the pipeline to move things forward. But then there's a task to go ahead and start preparing the return. Tasks themselves can actually have multiple statuses, and you can see that as well. It'll send a message right away. As soon as they submit it, it'll send a message saying, hey, thanks so much for filling out that organizer. We'll be in touch. Here's the time frame or things like that. And then you'll see, again, it updates the client-facing status to in progress. And this continues through all these different stages. There's cool things you can do with conditions. I'm not going to go too much because that's like a little more advanced, although I highly recommend. And again, you always have to be thinking about how this process actually shows to other people. Then it can go into a review stage, an invoice, and a signature stage, and you can do all your billing inside of TaxDome as well. They recently have been transferring over to this new system called TaxDome Payments, which is powered by Stripe, but it's not your own Stripe connection. From what I understand, I'm still on the old Stripe, which was one of their original connections. So I haven't really I haven't seen it, but they're introducing a lot more features. One of the big features that TaxDome was really known for a long time was locking the document to the invoice. So, most people would just send the tax return to, hey, here's your tax return, review it, and also here's an invoice. Instead, in order to view the tax return, they have to go ahead and pay that invoice. Like the invoice pops up first, which is just really good billing practice. I mean, personally, I moved my billing to the beginning of the stage, or excuse me, the beginning of the engagement. I try to bill up front as much as I can. For the most part, but for those who are going to bill after you do the work, it's a really good way of making sure you get paid before you actually file the return, or before you even give them access to the return. And then they feel like, oh, it's just a prerequisite of seeing that return, as opposed to seeing the return, not being happy with the results, and then being like, oh, I'm going to go ask my cousin who, goes prepares returns or whatever to go do it for me. But instead, they're making sure to pay you before they actually, before they get that return from you. One thing I've seen is that people value services usually before they pay, and then after they pay, it's really easy to devalue. I say the opposite. I think my clients are driving me nuts until they pay me, and then once they pay me, I'm happy to do anything for them. Which is why I had a much happier tax season this past year when I was billing up front, as opposed to last year when I was billing at the end, and then I can't believe a client got in touch with me again, as if like I don't do this as my day job. Anyways, but just to wrap up this pipeline, then it goes to the e-filing stage, where there's a task for, and you can assign these tasks as well, specifically, let's say, to an office manager, to just, go through that filing process. Then at that point, when the 1040 is complete, it's going to go ahead and add the account tag of returning client and remove new client. So anybody's tax return that you finished, right, if they're automatically now, a returning client, hopefully at least. And then you'll know that. It really depends on your firm situation, the type of clients you deal with. Every different clientels. I mean, again, this is a whole discussion in of itself. Different types of clients will react differently to upfront or at the end. Within TaxDome, that's the nice thing about TaxDome, is they try to stay very agnostic. I think that's the right word, to what the right way of doing things is. In fact, they're introducing now a new kiosk mode where you could literally have an iPad in your office for those who are still doing in-person appointments, for people who don't have email addresses, and you can sign up a client, have them complete all these tasks that they would usually do on their own on their computer from home or their phone from home, they could do inside the office. So TaxDome, it really is flexible both ways. I did meet with the product team about future releases for customized billing, which gets super complex, but will be very helpful for billing. But again, either side, either before or after. It really all depends on how you want to run your firm. You need to make that decision. We could talk about that for ages. And then at the end, there's a task to go ahead and what's this one? I don't even know what this one. Again, I'm not using this pipeline specifically, but for in my pipeline, I have at the end is to do some post filing things like making sure there's no unbilled time that's sort of just sitting there awkwardly that either I have to write off or decide if for some reason I need to send another invoice. I have a task to grade my client because I again, this is more idealistic than something I've actually put into practice. But I want to actually, I want to know who are those A clients, who are those B clients, who are those C clients. So when I, in July, August, September, when I'm sitting down and preparing for the next tax season, I can go ahead and pull that data and pull those stats to figure out, which type of clients do I want to continue with, which type of clients maybe we should raise their price, etc. And you can do all of this. Another great thing is that this email asking for a review gets sent out automatically. Not to brag, but if you look up Y10 Tax Solutions, I have a ton of 5-star reviews, and I'd like to think that has to do with how I work with my clients. But a huge part of that I totally owe to TaxDome because I implemented this system, and this email goes out automatically at the end of every single engagement, and people are happy to leave 5-star reviews. And it's the type of thing like you don't think about unless it's, again, going back to that original like overarching idea of practice management is every single step of the process, including marketing, needs to get put into a system. And when you systemize it, you can much better implement it. I'm going to go ahead and create a job from scratch just to show you this a little bit in practice. Again, it's going to be a little bit more of a mock-up just because of the way because we're using a demo account. And I highly recommend, another thing is, if at the point that you're using Taxome, if you already use it, create a demo account with your personal email address and go through the steps of seeing exactly what it looks like from both sides. So in this case, I just added a job with a demo client. And what's nice is at the beginning of whenever you switch a stage, if you're not doing it automatically, it will show you a list exactly of what is happening. And this goes back to that, like, you need to always know what's happening from the client's perspective and also from the firm's perspective. So in this case, right, it's going to send out the engagement letter, update the client-facing status to sign the engagement, to being called sign engagement letter. The reason these aren't showing up is because there's no email address connected, because again, this is a fake account, so it's not going to actually send an email, but that will move it. Then it's going to open up what's called the job card, which is literally this is your go-to place to connect all the elements to a job. And jobs, this gets a little more complicated, but jobs can actually be moved between pipelines, and there are different use cases that you might want to do that. But you can also at any time switch a job to a stage. Let's say, so I have this for my personal return. I'll always start it, and then I don't need to go through a proposal and waiting for organizer or whatever. I'll just go straight to, in prep, just so I can track it on my own. But inside of these job cards, you can actually, team members can leave comments. You can actually tag other team members as well, and they'll get a notification, which we'll talk about Inbox Plus in a second. So in this case, they have to sign the engagement letter. As soon as they sign the engagement letter, it's going to go to the next stage. Now, let's say I just want to go ahead and push it forward without them signing the engagement letter, just to show you. So then I can go ahead and select the stage, move it to the next stage, and it's going to show me exactly what's going to happen. It's going to create these folders. It's going to create the organizer. It's going to send a message. It's going to update the client-facing status. And then, what about that engagement letter? Well, we have a couple options on how to resolve that. Either we say move it to the next stage or unlink it, or we don't select anything and it'll just stay there unfinished. So in this case, I'm just going to leave it. And then you'll see now we're in the next stage, and they have to complete the organizer. They have to, and they still have to do that proposal as well. But it also opened up a chat message, which we can actually look at, saying, hey, and again, this is completely customizable. You can say even who it's sent from. But hey, we've sent over an organizer. This is what it's for. It's smart, so it'll ask follow-up questions based on, what you got. And I can probably spend a whole thing about organizers themselves. I'll show you real quick. Organizers are fantastic because they're completely customizable and they have conditional logic. So this is the view of the client, and you can actually complete this as if you're the client as well. But all these fields are completely customizable, different field types. and you'll see there's like different sections, and the sections can also be dependent on different answers that they give and different tags that they have. So, it's super, super helpful. You can say like, okay, if they answered, for example, like, if they answer 2020, then it's going to ask COVID questions. But if they say 2023, you'll see COVID doesn't appear. So this is much better than, whoever here has worked at, like, and maybe your firm does this today, where, you send out this 45-page organizer that the tax software like figures out where they, and then these clients will fill in all the W-2 figures themselves. It's something that happens, although, it's whatever. I was never for those from the start. It just creates a mess. But because this is smart, you can go ahead and really, figure out exactly what's good for your firm, what types of questions you want to ask. Like, I don't ask my clients anything about farming because I don't deal with farm clients. Right? If that was something I did, then maybe I would add it in. But I know, there's a limit to how many things, I'm going to be dealing with on a regular basis, depending on, what type of things, income they select. It's gonna, oh, I sold my home. Well, now it's gonna ask about selling my house. So again, and this is completely customizable. And at the end, there's actually a whole review process where you can, inside of TaxDome itself, mark off when something is reviewed. So when you've entered that into the return or however you want to do it, I reviewed this, and now it also makes it so it's not editable from the client side. And again, we can go more into that as well. Now, let's back up for a second, because I think a lot of you had the question of like, well, on a day-to-day basis, how do I even interact and deal with TaxDome? So I think my answer to that, and respectfully saying, I think it'll be different for everybody. But I think there's two answers to that, or two and a half. So number one is there's something called Inbox Plus, and Inbox Plus will go ahead and have notifications anytime there's either a new chat message, a new task, or a task is due. And again, that's completely customizable as well. Fun fact, I was the one who suggested to add the when a notification comes in, it used to only say the date, and now it says the date and the time that it came in, and that was my suggestion. I put it on the suggestion board, and they added it a day later. I was pretty amazed, which sometimes does happen. Sometimes it takes a while for things to get built, and sometimes they do it really quickly. I guess that was an easy one, so they knocked it off. But a lot of people will really work inside Inbox Plus, although I don't agree that you should on a regular basis, because working in Inbox Plus is almost no different than working inside your email inbox. Your email inbox is like a to-do list that someone else prepared, which it doesn't really, from a practice management standpoint, doesn't really make sense. Like, I should be approaching the work that I'm responsible for in the order that I know I'm going to take responsibility for it, as opposed to answering like a sales rep or, an email from Yehuda or whatever, which, again, anybody that answers my emails, I hold you to a very high esteem. But for most people, there's going to be two places you're going to be working inside TaxDome. Number one is the task view, which, sorry, I don't have any tasks. Here, I could actually let's move this job. I'll show you. We're going to move it to the in prep stage, and then I'm going to have a task, hopefully. Let's see, move there. And now there's a task for me to complete. And if I go inside my task view, oh, you know what? Because it didn't get assigned to me. Here, all tasks. So you see, here's a bunch of tasks. Edwin, who runs the community, he gave me access to this. So everything's basically assigned to him, but not to me. I can go ahead and add myself as the assignee. And then that task will be assigned to me. And then when I'm looking at my task board, I see, oh, well, there's one task for me to check phone numbers or, onboard this client. And I can go ahead and choose a status. You can have urgency. Again, there's like so many different ways you can customize this. But I'm going to start from my task list, starting at the top, whatever's due the earliest, whatever, meaning it's the most urgent. But that's more for people working inside TaxDome. For people working on the firm, like let's say firm owners, trying to see like, okay, different staff members are doing work. Where you might work most of the time is inside the pipeline view, where you can see, Yeah, and this would look much better. Like if you looked at mine, well, not right now, but during tax season, you'd see, so many different people in various stages where you can go ahead and scroll down and go, okay, well, this person's, we're doing their 2025 tax return. We can see all these different stats. We can then click into it and open the job card, see where it's at, right? So it really depends on where you're going to be working on, but I think that's the most important. Those were a bunch of features about TaxDome. There's like a million more features that I could talk about for hours, but I want to give some final closing thoughts and then a quick announcement. So first of all, my final thoughts is that every single software will have its pros and its cons. And as practitioners, we need to know how to be responsible stewards of the software we're using. I'll give you an example. Reporting in TaxDome, it's super powerful. It's also super difficult to use, even though they have like an AI thing that will make like a certain report. Like I've used it a bunch of times and I was able to come up with like some really cool reporting things. At the end of the day, though, like it's just not super user friendly. So guess what? I don't really use it so much, and that's okay. Like just because you're not using one or two features here and there doesn't mean there's something wrong with the software. And by the way, I've seen time and time again where people will get upset at TaxDome for one thing or another, which happens. It happens with every single software out there. And then they'll leave, and then I see on Facebook groups, they'll go, yeah, I switched to ABC Practice Management or whatever it is, and it's the worst. Because, they went to their sales reps, and their sales reps will, go ahead and promise left and right, oh, yeah, we're going to be much better. But at the end of the day, like, every software is going to have its pros and it's going to have its cons. And it's your responsibility to go ahead and figure out, well, what makes sense for me. And I think as a firm owner, you need to not just take responsibility for what makes sense for me, but also what makes sense for what I'm trying to accomplish. Because if I'm trying to do this all by myself, sometimes it's not going to work.